You know the dread. A missing invoice. A phishing mail that got through. You click through a dozen admin centers, hunting a silent rule while the CEO asks why legal mail isn't encrypted. You could spend the afternoon clicking, or you could command the entire mail flow from one place. By the end of this, you will have traced a real attack, fixed the routing, closed the malware gap, and released that critical mail, all without leaving your shell. You're working through a real mail flow incident right now. If you want to automate that kind of troubleshooting, this course shows you how to build AI agents that handle Microsoft 365 administration tasks using Microsoft Graph, Python, and Azure AI. It covers security investigations, compliance reporting, and proactive fixes, with practical labs and a full capstone project. We begin by building an identity that can sign in without a human, which makes everything schedulable. First, we baseline the existing rules with Connect Exchange Online and Get Transport rule to understand the attacker's changes. Then we trace the missing mail using Get Message Trace and Get Date to pinpoint the gap. We fix routing and stand up new gateway connectors with new inbound connector and new outbound connector. After that, we build Legal's outbound confidential content rule with new transport rule and close the ransomware gap using Set Malware Filter policy. Finally, we release the CEO's invoice right now with Get Quarantine message. You walk away with a complete set of scripts you can run on any Microsoft 365 tenant. Before any of this can be automated, the tenant needs an identity that a script can sign in as. We build that in code, because a course about automation should not start by asking you to click through a portal. By the end of this section, you will have an app registration, a service principal, and a connection that needs no human at all. We install the Microsoft Graph module into the current user scope. This avoids needing local admin rights and keeps our automation environment self-contained. We connect interactively with exactly the two scopes needed to register an application and grant consent. We never ask for the broad directory read-write-all permission. We look up the exact Exchange Manage as app role by name instead of hard-coding a GUID. The only literal GUID we use is Microsoft Graph's own well-known application ID, which is stable and safe. We register an application named M365 Mail Flow Automation, restricted to our tenant only. This app will represent our automation scripts, not a human user. We create the service principal, which is the identity the app uses inside our tenant. Then we add a client secret. A certificate is the production choice, but a secret lets us get started quickly. The secret text is shown only once. We grant admin consent so the app can use Exchange Manage as app without a signed-in user. Then we connect unattended using the client secret. This is the pattern every lab script will use from now on. The script installs the module silently, then connects interactively. It registers the app M365 Mail Flow Automation, creates its service principal, and generates a client secret. The secret text appears once we save it securely. After granting admin consent in the browser, the script connects unattended and prints the welcome message, confirming our automation identity is ready. When you inherit a tenant, you don't know what rules are already in the pipeline. Exchange evaluates transport rules from priority 0 downward, and a rule can stop processing on a match, so a low-priority rule you haven't seen yet can swallow mail before later rules ever fire. Worse, a rule can show state-enabled but run in audit mode, which logs but doesn't enforce, so a quick glance at the state column can fool you into ruling out a real culprit. That's why we pull every rule, sort by priority, and inspect both state and mode before we change anything. In a moment you'll run a single pipeline that surfaces the full list, and you'll watch for a rule named Redirect Old Partner Routing sitting at priority 1 in full enforce mode, exactly the kind of silent redirect that can explain missing mail. We're about to connect to Exchange Online and pull every transport rule, sorted by priority, showing name, priority, state, mode, and description. The result will be a clean table, and you'll spot a high-priority redirect rule that's been quietly rerouting mail to a legacy group. First, Connect Exchange Online authenticates with the admin account at contoso.com. Then get transport rule grabs every rule in the organization and pipes them into sort object priority, so the list comes back in evaluation order, priority 0 at the top. Format table with name, priority, state, mode, and description gives us the columns that matter for a baseline. State tells us if the rule is enabled, mode tells us if it's actually enforcing, and description often holds the human readable intent. Autosize keeps the table readable without truncating important details. Right at priority 0, the very first rule evaluated, we have redirect old partner routing, state enabled, mode enforce. That means every message addressed to northwindpartner.com is being redirected to a distribution group called Partner Routing Legacy before any other rule even sees it. This is exactly the kind of silent redirect the theory warned about. It looks active, it is active, and it explains why mail to that partner domain stopped arriving. The pitfall here is that if you'd only check state, you'd see enabled and might assume it's fine, but mode enforce confirms it's really doing the damage. When a rule says it redirects mail, it's tempting to just read the rule and assume that's what's happening. But rule conditions and exceptions are easy to misread, especially under pressure. The only way to be certain is to ask Exchange what it actually did with a real message. That's what we're doing here. We're taking the sales rep's specific complaint, their email to the partner domain, and running a message trace tied to their sender, their recipient, and the last 3 days. This trace will show us the true routing status, not what the rule appears to say. Watch for a status of redirected and a detail event pointing to that legacy address from step 1. We'll run get message trace with Alex Rivera's address, the partner recipient, and a 3-day window. Then we'll drill into the detail. Expect to see redirected in the status, confirming the stale rule is silently rerouting the mail. First, we capture the trace into a variable. We specify the sender as Alex Rivera, the recipient at the partner domain, and a start date of 3 days ago to catch the missing mail. Then we pipe to format table to see the received time, status, and IPs. Finally, we take the first trace ID from that result and feed it into get message trace detail for the same recipient, which will show us the specific routing events. There it is. The status is redirected, not delivered. And the detail view shows a redirect event with the action pointing directly to partner routing legacy contoso.com. That's the stale rule from step 1 in action, silently rerouting the mail instead of letting it fail or bounce. This confirms the theory against a real message, so we know exactly what to fix. Before we wire up the new gateway, we have to remove the thing that's been silently dropping mail for 3 days, that stale redirect rule. Leaving it active while adding connectors creates routing conflicts that are a nightmare to untangle. Next, we'll verify the accepted domain is still authoritative. If it somehow got set to internal relay, Exchange Online thinks another mail system might handle some recipients, and it will stop delivering locally, which is exactly the kind of silent failure that makes a sales rep scream. With the domain confirmed, we build 2 partner connectors, an inbound one that only trusts the gateway's specific IPs, and an outbound one that routes all mail through the gateway's smart host. Watch for the disabled rule, the authoritative domain type, and both connectors showing enabled. We'll run disable transport rule, check get accepted domain, then create the inbound and outbound connectors. The output will show the rule is disabled, the domain is authoritative, and both connectors are created and enabled. First, disable transport rule targets the old redirect rule by its exact identity, with confirm set to false so it runs without prompting. Then get accepted domain pipes to format table so we see domain name, domain type, and default. We're checking that contoso.com is authoritative. Next, new inbound connector creates a partner connector named Gateway Inbound. Sender domains is set to asterisk, but because restrict domains to IP addresses is true, only mail from the 2 listed sender IP addresses will be treated as coming from the gateway. This prevents anyone else from spoofing the gateway role. Require TLS is on for encryption. Finally, new outbound connector creates Gateway Outbound, sending all outbound mail to the gateway smart host via TLS encryption, and use MX record is false so it ignores public MX records and routes directly. The transport rule now shows state disabled, so it's no longer interfering. Accepted domain confirms contoso.com is authoritative, not internal relay, exactly what we needed to see before adding connectors. Both new connectors show enabled, true and connector type, partner. Notice the inbound connector sender domains is asterisk, but because we restricted it to those two IPs, a random attacker can't just claim to be our gateway and bypass spoofing checks. That's the pitfall avoided. Legal needs a rule that flags outbound mail containing confidential content before it leaves the organization. We scope it tightly to external recipients only, so internal discussions using the same keywords don't trigger false alerts. The rule uses content matching on terms like confidential and NDA protected, and when it fires, it generates an incident report with the original mail attached and sends it to legal. One critical thing to budget for: new or changed transport rules can take up to 30 minutes to replicate across every Exchange Online front-end server worldwide, so a test message sent too soon may hit a server that hasn't picked up the rule yet. In this lab, you'll create the rule and then verify it appears at the top of the priority list. I'll run new transport rule to create the rule, scope to external mail and matching confidential keywords. The output will confirm the rule is created, and we'll see it sitting at priority 0. We're calling new transport rule with a descriptive name. Sent to scope is set to not in organization, which means this only applies to mail leaving the tenant. Subject or body contains words lists the confidential terms to match. Generate incident report specifies legalcontoso.com as the recipient, and incident report original mail ensures the full original message is attached. Mode is enforced so the rule is active immediately, and priority 0 pushes it to the very top of the rule evaluation order. The rule is created and shows as enabled with mode enforce at priority 0. That means it will be evaluated first for every outbound message. Just remember the pitfall: inserting at priority 0 silently renumbers every other rule down by 1, so always recheck your full transport rule order after adding a high priority rule to make sure nothing critical got bumped out of sequence. When a ransomware-laced attachment reaches a mailbox, the gap is rarely in just one place. Exchange Online Protection evaluates messages through two independent policy stacks. Anti-malware policies control attachment type blocking, while anti-spam policies score content and apply threshold actions. If the file type filter was never turned on, a malicious.docmore.js file sails right past the malware layer regardless of its content. And if the spam confidence threshold is set too loose, a phishing message carrying that attachment can land in the inbox even if the attachment itself would have been caught. That is why we pull both policy types before making any change, so we can see the full picture. You are about to discover that the default malware policy has file filtering disabled entirely, then close the gap by enabling it and adding the script and macro extensions ransomware campaigns favor. We will run get malware filter policy and get hosted content filter policy to inspect the current defaults, then use set malware filter policy to enable file filtering and add 5 dangerous extensions. Watch for enable file filter coming back as false on the first command, that is the root cause. First, get malware filter policy pipes into format list to show the policy name, whether file filtering is enabled, and which file types are currently blocked. Then get hosted content filter policy does the same for the spam side, revealing the bulk threshold, spam action, and high confidence spam action. Finally, set malware filter policy targets the default policy, sets enable file filter to true, and uses the add hash table syntax to append JS, GS, WSF, VEB, and DOT to the existing blocked file types list without wiping anything out. There it is, enable file filter is false on the default malware policy, and the file types list is empty. That means every attachment type, including scripts and macros, was being allowed through unchecked. On the spam side, the bulk threshold and actions look reasonable, so the breach was purely a malware policy gap. The set malware filter policy command completes silently, which is expected. PowerShell only returns output on errors. The gap is now closed, and the existing block list is preserved because we used the add syntax rather than replacing the whole array. When a real invoice lands in quarantine, the pressure to release it immediately is intense, but that's exactly how lookalike domain fraud succeeds. The right approach is a targeted verification. Pull only the CEO's quarantine messages from the last 2 days, inspect the sender address and headers against the vendor's known domain, and confirm the quarantine type is something like bulk rather than malware. Then release it to just the CEO, not to every recipient the message was originally quarantined for. In this lab, you'll see how a scoped search and a single header check turn a fire drill into a controlled, safe release. We'll retrieve the CEO's recent quarantine messages, pick the invoice, inspect its headers, and release it to the CEO alone, watching for the release to all pitfall. First, get quarantine message filters by the CEO's address and a 2-day window using start receive date and end receive date. We format the results to see subject, sender address, receive time, type, and identity. After identifying the invoice, we grab its identity and run get quarantine message header to inspect the full headers. Finally, release quarantine message releases it with release to all set to false and the user parameter explicitly set to the CEO's address, so only that mailbox gets the message. The table shows a single quarantine message from billingfabricam.com with type bulk, not malware, and a recent timestamp. The headers confirm SPF and DKIM passed for fabricam.com, matching the real vendor domain. Because we set release to all to false and specified the CEO's address, only that mailbox receives the release. If the same message had been quarantined for other recipients, they remain untouched. We covered a complete PowerShell incident response workflow, from baselining transport rules with get transport rule to releasing a quarantine message using get quarantine message. You built inbound and outbound connectors, created a confidential content rule for legal, and closed a ransomware gap by reconfiguring your malware filter policy. The single most useful thing to carry away is that every step of this mail flow attack recovery can be automated, which means your next incident response can be a script you run, not a series of clicks you hunt for.